Hi everyone, my name is Suma, and today I hope to explore some work from LL Research, which is a non-profit organization that is dedicated to discovering and sharing information about spiritual advancement for human mankind. LL Research has published a very well-known book called Law of One, the Raw Material. It was first conceived by Don Elkins and Carla Rueckert in 1970. And today I'm here with Jim McCarty, who is founder of LL Research, Gary Bean, the director, and Austin Bridges, the assistant director of LL. Thank you so much for making this happen.
We're very glad to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you.
Can we first, I know you have a bunch of books published by LL. The one I would love to focus today is the Wanderer's book. For someone who is new, can you give us a background about what is a wanderer?
Well, it's a person supposedly that has an origin from someplace other than planet Earth and has come to Earth to be of service to Earth. The whole theory is that there is an evolution of consciousness that we're all engaged in, and that sometimes a planet like Earth has problems in that consciousness expansion with disharmony, with wars and so forth, such has been the history of planet Earth. And when that happens, there are brothers and sisters throughout the universe that seem to be able to respond to our call for assistance. And when we have these disharmonies, that's basically giving out a call for assistance. And there are a number of ways that the entities in higher levels of reality or higher densities can aid us. And one of the ways is by incarnating to become one of us, going through the same forgetting process that all of us go through, because all of us are from, different incarnations. We've had different places and done different lives. So everybody forgets all of that, so that when they come here in this life, it'll be pure and clear, and we'll deal just with those situations that we want to deal with here, we plan to deal with. So these wanderers go through the same process that we go through. They forget that they're a wanderer. There's just this little bit of a nudge in their total being that gives them a feeling of maybe that they are from elsewhere, and maybe there is a work that they can do to help people here. So what wanderers basically do as they come here is try to remember the reason that they came, to be of service to Earth, and they can serve just by being here, because they have lighter vibrations. They can help relieve some of the stressful vibrations that we have here on the planet. And they also have special skills that they can contribute. Maybe they're a healer, or a teacher, or an investigator into different levels of reality or consciousness. So a wanderer is basically from elsewhere, but the whole idea of the Law of One is that even though you're from elsewhere, we're all one in the seeking of the one infinite creator that made us all. That's the whole theory. We're all going back home.
Could the idea of wanderer, could it create more separation from Earthlings?
That's possible. It's a unique situation for every person that is a wanderer as to how they respond to that. Some people think that it's something worth advertising. I think most feel it's something more sacred than that it is something to feel good about, but to kind of put it on the shelf and go ahead with your life and do what you come to do. And let your service be that which you show the world. And don't worry about, well, where are you from? Are you 15th city? Are you 16th city? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here to help.
And how do you tell if someone is a wanderer if they haven't had any experiences?
Either of you like to try it?
You want to take a first go at it?
Well, okay. A lot of the feelings of being a wanderer come from not feeling like you belong here, that you're really out of place and there's something wrong, that you want to go home. You don't feel like this is home at all. It's very alien, and sometimes it feels threatening. Wanderers do have some problems with adjusting into the vibrations of the Earth. They develop allergies, literally allergic to the planet, to this type of environment that is so inharmonious. So, and there's psychological problems that can develop as well. So it's not a given that when a wanderer comes here, that he or she is going to be successful in remembering what the mission was and how to accomplish it. It's a great challenge. Our primary contact at that time, back in the early 80s, was Ra, and they said that you have to have a great deal of, however you look at it, bravery or foolhardiness to come here and be a wanderer, because it's not going to be easy. You know, it's going to take a lot of work. But if you can remember that you are a wanderer and go ahead with that service that you wish to offer, you can advance your consciousness a great deal more rapidly than doing anything else. And that seems to be the way that we all grow. When we go beyond this density and go into the fourth, fifth, and sixth, the way we continue growing is by serving other people. That's basically it.
To add an additional thought to Jim's, you asked, how does one know they are a wanderer? And really, there's no surefire way. There's no test. There's nothing that will prove it to anybody else. It comes as a certain sort of inner surety. And even then, a lot of people who feel they are wanderers wonder if they are, but don't know. Some actually, we cross paths with some people who, prior to encountering any information about wanderers, have memories that they're born with of life on other worlds. Or they have dreams, or they have a past life regression and recall a lifetime that was not lived here on Earth. Or they recall the moment when they decided, rather, when their soul decided that they wanted to respond to the call of sorrow on planet Earth and incarnate here. So some have that rock solid, incontrovertible knowing from personal memory. Some read material like that which research offers, or receive other triggers in life that awaken them to the possibility that they may be wanderers, but they don't know. It's an open question for the rest of their life. I think some indicators that one is a wanderer include, one, that one is asking oneself the question. That's could be a sign. Two, if one is drawn to spiritual seeking in general, and if one resonates with concepts about the universe and the unity of the universe. And as Jim was describing, if one has some difficulty with this planet, which is not unique to wanderers at all, most people who live here have some kind of difficulty. But yeah, those might be some indicators. What do you think?
Yeah, it's one of the most common questions we get, is people emailing asking if they're wanderers, and it's impossible for us to answer whether or not it's true. But I tend to look at it as, if it's useful to consider yourself in that way, if that identity feels right in that moment, then what's the harm in accepting it? And maybe down the road you'll question that again and say, maybe I'm not a wanderer. But if just accepting it at that stage of your spiritual journey is helpful, then I would say just accept it. Dive into it, see where it leads you.
And one of the missions of wanderers, it seems to be about moving to a higher density. Could you explain the idea of density and the difference from first density to seventh density?
That's a large field. You can look at the analogy of the musical scale of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and then do again at a higher level. So our experience, our creation, seems to be of a certain nature where basic lessons are learned in the first density, where there's basic consciousness, there's the beginnings of life, the awareness, simple awareness. And then there's a vibrational change, like a quantum leap that happens after a great period of time, almost immeasurable. Ross suggested it was 2 billion years. And that's, it's hard to imagine that. But Then there is what we could see as plant life and animal life, the basic beginnings of life. Single-cell creatures begin it, and throughout the second density, this higher vibration moves toward growth, movement and growth. And this is the longest of the densities, almost 4.5 billion years long. So then we come to where we are now. There is this general consciousness that has learned to move and to grow and become self-conscious. So that here in the third density, we are the first complete beings. We have a mind, a body, and a spirit, and we are self-conscious. In order for us to move further, we have to use that self-consciousness in a way that polarizes. If you look at a car battery, it has a positive and a negative pole. And it does work according to how much difference there is between the positive and the negative pole. So in our consciousness, we need to do the same thing. We need to choose either to be of service to others and give of ourselves more than we take for ourselves. Or there's a negative way to get to higher densities too. And that is you have to take a whole lot more than you ever give. You don't mean to give anything. There are, for a while, for a period of time, in the evolution of consciousness, there are negatively oriented entities that do progress, just like we do. So if we are successful in polarizing our consciousness more than 51% of the time in service to others, if we can respond in love to everything that happens to us 51% of the time, then we can go on to a higher density. We can go to the fourth density, which is the density of love and understanding. And at this density, we don't have the veil of forgetting. This is the only place here, in the third density, we forget what this is all about. Because we have to make that choice. And that choice has to be made without any unfair advantages of seeing the unity of creation, of realizing that we are the creator and so forth. We have to believe very sincerely and strongly that, well, I don't know what this is all about. I'm trying real hard to grow, and I think this is the way to do it. So I'm going to try to be of service to others. I'm going to try to open my heart in unconditional love and give it every chance I get. And if we can do that, then we progress in the positive sense. In the fourth density, that is the love and understanding density. And in that density, everything eventually is understood. We know how all of this works. And we are attempting then to move into the density of wisdom so that we can be wise about how we give our service. Because in the fourth density, one of the things we want to do very much is to go back and help people in the third density where we just came from, because we know how hard it was. You know, it took everything we had to get, to learn to move past the third density, the disharmonies that are so apparent here. So in the fourth density, there's a great deal of compassion, and it's not balanced at all. And people want to serve, they want to come back, and they want to help out. And sometimes mistakes are made when you're so desirous, totally committed to being of service to others. And there is a way of balancing that by moving into the levels of wisdom, which is the fifth density. So if we can begin to learn something about how to wisely use our energies, then the fifth density is where we do that. And we can become more able to be of service to others in ways that may not be quite so foolish. Sometimes, if you look back on how we wanted to serve so badly, well, I kind of overdid that, didn't I? Okay, well, we can learn how to be more wise. And if we move further on to the sixth density, that's where the total balance between the love and the wisdom occurs. And that is where we begin to see everyone as the creator. And even the negatively oriented entities at that point have to give up their negative polarity, because everybody that wants to move to the sixth density has to be able to see that the self is the creator, but every other self is also the creator. You can't be controlling and manipulating and enslaving other selves, which is the way negative polarity works. So once you get into the sixth density, then it's sort of the momentum is really built. And the seventh density is what Rueckert called the density of foreverness. It's where the movement back to the creator becomes completed, that we become the creator once again, and bring all of the experiences that we gathered through all of these seven densities up to that point to the 7th density, and then into the 8th. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, back to do again, but at a higher level. So that the Creator now has all of the experiences from our free will choices that we've ever made, infinity of experiences, to know more of itself, which seems to be the reason for the creation, so the Creator can know itself. So it takes that harvest of what's just been done, density 1 through 7, into the 8th, and amalgamates it so that it can learn more for the next octave of being. And this seems to be an infinite process.
What's the difference between densities, dimension, and octaves?
Dimension and density are basically the same. Our contact Ra uses the word density to describe how dense each level or dimension is in light. So as you progress up, red, orange, yellow, green, blue to violet, you're getting more dense with light. The octave is the total number, or an octave has eight densities. The first density of one octave is the 8th density of another. So it's just like the musical scale.
And how does a planet move from 3rd density to 4th density?
Well, planets themselves do seem to do that moving too. Planets are also entities that respond to the populations and the people that are inhabiting them. So that the planet is more certain in its movement than as the population. If you take Earth as an example, our Mother Earth, Gaia, is in 4th density already, waiting for her children to catch up, because we have so many entities that have come from other planets that had problems making 3rd density and 4th density harvest. And they're trying again here. When you don't make the harvest at the end of 75,000 years, which is the time we have in the 3rd density, you don't go to hell, and there's not a heaven there. What you do is you go back to another 3rd density planet like Earth, and you try again, and you try for as many times as is necessary. And this planet has a great deal of its population that are those who have found the necessity to repeat the 3rd density. So our Mother Earth is waiting for a greater number of entities to make those choices to be of service to others or of service to self. What we have a problem with here is making the choice.
Would you like to add to that?
Yeah, my understanding per the law of one is that Ra describes a clock-like face that's stretched across the universe. And as a planet within a solar system spiraling around the center of a galaxy moves into a different portion of what Ra calls intelligent energy, this intelligent energy is the clock. As that planet moves into a new portion of space, then the new density becomes available. The Ra describes the vibration upgrading, taking a quantum leap forward. So for instance, like Earth started out in a 1st density space, and like Jim said, spent a long time within that density, and then Earth moved into a 2nd density vibrational spectrum, and then biological life became possible on planet Earth. So Earth spent for the next like 4.6 billion years, according to Ra, time in 2nd density, and then when Earth moved into the 3rd density space, those beings of 2nd density who had successfully learned the lessons of self-awareness were then eligible to graduate into this new vibrational environment called 3rd density. And as Jim described, Earth is now moving into and is in the beginnings of a 4th density space. So, just like, say, when 3rd grade ends in school, and there's not a correlation between grades in school and these densities, but for illustration, say you are moving through the 3rd grade and learning whatever the lessons of 3rd grade are. If at the time 3rd grade has reached its end because it's on a schedule, and you have learned all that you successfully learned all the 3rd grade lessons, then you're ready to go on to 4th grade. Similarly with those on this planet, if you have learned the lessons of love, as Jim was describing, on a positive or negative path, then you are eligible to graduate from this experience and then inhabit the new vibrational environment.
How about you, Austin? What are some of the ways to move to 4th density?
Well, I guess they were talking about learning the lessons of love, and Gary mentioned positive or negative. So one of the biggest questions people have is, how is that possible for a negative entity to learn the lessons of love? And it's not a simple answer, but the love of self is essentially what gets them there. Is they, as much as we would show love outwardly, show love inwardly by taking advantage of all the opportunities that third density offers them to use people and the environment to their own advantage and to the benefit of the self. But they did a pretty good job explaining the progression of the Earth into fourth density, I think.
I've also come across this idea about 51%. Could you expand more on that?
I might not be the best one to take that because I don't like the percentage idea a whole lot because it's hard to tell exactly what that means. It can mean 51% of our thoughts and actions and behavior are pointed towards service to others, but the idea is that for service to others, individuals to graduate into fourth density, 51%, they have to achieve 51% service to others. For service to self, that is much higher in that they have to achieve 95% service to self. I think it's a bit confusing to think of things like that. It can be helpful, but another way to look at it, besides the percentages, is a sort of balance in how the service to others entity approaches others, and if they have learned their lessons to an adequate degree, thinking about the energy centers, which we'll probably get to, but learning their lessons and balancing and achieving a certain threshold that isn't necessarily percentages. I don't know. It's a confusing topic. They might be better at discussing it.
Like Austin, the percentages have always been a little bit confusing, primarily because there's no instrumentation that is going to measure one's percentage. But according to Ra, as we've been talking about, in this third density plane of existence, our job is to polarize our consciousness. Polarity in the political and societal realms right now has negative connotation, but in consciousness, this environment is literally designed in order that we will polarize our consciousness, which means to make a choice, as Austin was describing, the positive path of service to others or the negative path of service to self. And apparently Ra says that this, as we polarize our consciousness and make our choice and commit ourselves to one path or another and successfully open our heart if we're on the positive path and learn to love others, then our overall vibration, like the sum of all of our energy centers and their synthesis, can be measured. And Ra says that 51% of the being, if 51% of the self has successfully polarized, then you've made the grade. You have successfully learned the lessons of love on the positive path. And like Austin was saying, that percentage for the negative polarity is 95%, which means that, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's much more difficult to polarize along the negative path because your commitment must be so much more total and so much more pure. 95%, according to Ra, of your being must be committed to serving only the self and manipulating, enslaving, and controlling others for the benefit of yourself.
What are your thoughts?
I think the 51% is just meant to give us an idea that we have to be more in one direction in the positive sense than the other. You just have to have enough of a foot in the love vibration to be able to have that become your total experience eventually. You have to head down that road, and the 51% just suggests, well, you're going down that road, and how far you go is pretty much up to you. Apparently we walk into the light after we pass from this life, and the light measures our ability to accept more and more light, which is possible when the heart is open. It's one of the basic energy centers. There has to be a balance between all of the energy centers, but the heart has to be open enough to be able to accept more of the light that we do walk into. And people talk about the tunnel and the light, and apparently it really does exist. People who have gone through regressions sometimes go through that again and see what is happening after you've been through the tunnel and experienced the light, and there are entities that greet you in the fourth density, welcoming you basically home.
The energy center, that reminds me, your book describes different energy centers, red, violet, and there's, I guess, 7 energy centers.
7 in the body, and then there's the white one above the...
Can you explain those energy centers?
Well, they're similar in some regards to the densities of creation. We kind of recapitulate the creation in our own being, so that we are a minor or small universe, and apparently we also do have the Creator within us. So the very first energy center is the red one, and that's the one that deals with survival and reproduction. It's a basic center, and all of our experiences apparently are drawn to us through the red energy center. The prana, or the intelligent energy from the Creator, moves there first. And according to our pre-incarnated choices, we begin to perceive the world around us in the way that we had chosen beforehand in order to learn certain lessons. There's all kinds of lessons we can be learning that are related to love. So as we move into the orange ray, we begin to look into the individual expression of energies, the emotional center, the center where we have intense relationships on a one-to-one basis, maybe with one other person. You and your mom, you and your dad, you and your brother, you and your sister, you and your teacher, you and your neighbor, whatever. In this way, we begin to expand our experience and how we see the world around us. We begin to look at it in that way, hopefully, that we programmed beforehand, because we have certain lessons. Each of us has these lessons that we feel will help us to make it into the fourth density if we can respond in a certain way to these experiences that come our way. So then again, as we move further into the yellow ray, we move into a wider expansion of expression of these energies. So we look at ourselves in groups. We start with the family, of course, maybe the neighborhood, maybe school, work, team, whatever. We identify with larger groups and begin to express ourselves in those groups. And so as we move into the yellow energy center, we have a wider influence and ability to express ourselves as conscious beings, and begin to refine more of those lessons that we hope to learn before the incarnation. So then the great leap forward in third density is when we begin to make a movement into the green ray energy center. This is the ability to express unconditional love for everyone and everything. And that is the place where we are now able to be harvested. And if we are able, while we're still here on the third density planet, to continue our progress, then we begin what Rueckert called the work of the adept. We move beyond the green ray, the open heart. And the blue ray then, at the throat, is where our communication is of paramount importance, where we begin to share freely with all others that inspiration and communication that is ours, because we have made it through red, orange, yellow, and green. And now we can begin to talk about love and light and work and consciousness. And we begin also to be able to receive communication more clearly from others. We don't block it. The blue ray is totally open. And then the next one is the work of the adept, and most especially in the indigo ray, which is the brow chakra, or the third eye, which a lot of people call it. And in that energy center, we begin to first perceive ourselves as the Creator. That the Creator that made us now is in every portion of the creation, and that includes in us. And we begin to have an awareness of a force beyond ourselves that is accessible, perhaps in meditation, perhaps in contemplation, perhaps in illuminatory experiences that just seem to happen on their own. People talk about having a nirvana experience, or an enlightenment experience, or samadhi, or kensho. There's all kinds of names for it in different cultures, where the indigo ray is expressing itself in a way that is quite powerful. It is the Creator in miniature. Our higher self and our magical personality reside there. Those are the same entities, basically. Our higher self is a source that we can access maybe in prayer or dreams or meditation, and ask for guidance. asks for protection, asks for inspiration. And then, of course, the violet ray, Ross said, is basically the measure of the entity's entire energy center system, of how balanced it is. Because one of the things that is important as we're moving through the energy centers is to move through them in a balanced fashion, so that we have an ability to welcome and enjoy the love and light of the Creator in a way that does not overstimulate us in any particular center and make it difficult for us to move into the fourth density. So that's basically the description of the energy centers, and they are, like I said, in relation to the density, there's a great deal of correlation between them.
And how do you balance those energy centers?
You're getting into big questions here. Do you guys want to try that?
Balance. Let me take a step back first and say that the energy centers are really an awesome model for understanding the self, because they illustrate how consciousness is arranged within the self hierarchically. Like as Jim was describing, you have this very fundamental level at the red ray, and then as you move up each energy center, you're moving up a level. And the way that life works is that the red ray will always have the consciousness of the red ray will always have the first opportunity to respond to any situation. Then if that energy center is unblocked and open, then the energy can spiral upward into the orange ray. And then if that energy center is unblocked and balanced with the rest of the system, energy can move up into the yellow ray, and so forth. And that energy that is moving up into the energy centers is life itself. It's your financial situation, your marriage, your relationship, your job, your inner thoughts, your moods, your feelings, all of it Ra calls catalyst. Because every moment that we experience here on Earth, and all the content of that moment, however mundane it may seem or however sometimes trivial, it is all catalyst for our own spiritual evolution. And we progress in the degree to which we use that catalyst to activate these centers, open them, and balance them. Now, to your question about balance, you said, how do we balance? So, let me try it this way. Ra describes that the creation is one thing, but the creation is ultimately one thing. There's an underlying unity. There's one life. But the one at the birth of the creation becomes the many. Many things. Stars, galaxies, solar systems, entities on planets, and so forth. And that many consist of polarities. Really simple, low-hanging fruit include hot and cold, night and day, here or there. I'm wondering how much I should stretch that list out. But hate and love, fear or control and love, and so forth. So we have all those polarities within ourselves. And Ra says that these energy centers are functioning most maximally, and energy is moving up through us insofar as we balance the polarities within ourselves. And they gave an exercise for doing this. And I feel like there's more metaphysical material that can be mined out of that, but I'm coming up against the wall, so hopefully Austin might have something about why balance is necessary. But the technique that Ra gave to find balance within the self was to say one is experiencing, we'll go with something simple like anger. One has a lot of anger within themselves. So Ra says in order to balance this, the self would accentuate the anger, intensify it, focus on it, enlargen it, let it grow and grow and grow and grow till it possibly consumes the self almost. One is just raging with anger inside. And this is a completely internal practice. Ra doesn't say aim this anger towards somebody else. but within, in a sort of meditative state, expand that anger, and then as it reaches its zenith of intensity, then allow it to fall away and allow its antithesis to come into play. Because anger is just one part or one fragment of a whole. And the journey of spiritual evolution is to discover the wholeness of the self. That we are not just this angry self, but we are also the peaceful self. We are not just male, but we are also female. And we are essentially all things because there is only one. That's where balance is good to understand, because insofar as we are identifying with a lopsided half of the whole, we're missing our larger identity. So back to what I was saying about the technique. Let it, the anger intensify and expand, and when it reaches that, the culmination, allow it to fade, and then allow its antithesis to come up, which I guess could be love or peace or equanimity. And then to see that both these polarities exist within the self, and to thereby become a more integrated being that is able to keep the heart open and not let the heart be blocked by a distortion like anger.
I think a really important aspect in talking about balance is that a lot of people hear balance and think coldness or indifference or something like that. But the way Ra describes it is that balance is a finely tuned compassion. The natural state of our beings, of the universe, being that based on unity and acceptance and love, meaning that balance is settling into that, essentially. And then another aspect that I would touch on is that it hasn't been said so far, but the energy centers are essentially chakras, as they're discussed in other systems. And this isn't something that's necessarily unique to Ra specifically. Like, pretty much everything in the Law of One is a different perspective on things that have been discussed for ages and ages before. So this is sort of like a system of development. It mirrors a lot of modern developmental psychological systems. So like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and things like that. Basically go up this very similar hierarchy to the energy system, and addressing needs and emotions as they appear as you travel up the system in a natural progression is not necessarily unique to Ra, but Ra gives a unique take on it.
That's interesting. I like that explanation. Is it possible that when some of your chakras, energy centers, let's say the yellow energy center has some blocking in it, but is it still possible you could have an open blue energy center, or does it have to go in a certain sequence? If there is a blockage in lower energy centers, it blocks even the higher ones.
No, there's no definite sequence that you have to pursue in order to unblock energy centers. You can have a clear blue energy center and have a block anywhere lower than that. That has its own needs to be dealt with. And if you have a clear blue energy center, it might be a good way of dealing with whatever blockage you've got in a lower energy center. So clear communication is something that is very important, not only with other people, but to clearly communicate with yourself what's going on in the lower energy centers. The basic thing I think that we need to remember is that only love is real in this reality. Everything else is a means to learn love. Every other emotion, every other experience we will ever have, they're all teaching tools. It may seem that great sadness and sorrow and sickness or anger or elation or boredom are all real, and they're meant to be seen and felt as real, so we will use them as if they were real. And so we can balance our confusion with certainty, we can balance our lack with surplus. All these balances have the purpose of giving us a chance to respond to them with love. And if we can do that at least 51% of the time, or more than half of the time, then we're available for harvest. But I think the thing that is hardest to realize for most people is that most of what we go through here is an illusion, and it has a purpose. It's an illusion with a purpose. That's to teach, and it teaches love, and that is the reality.
I had something to add, but if you want to ask a question.
No, sure, go ahead.
On the mechanics of the sequence of the chakras, energy that is available for the blue ray is only available insofar as it is at least partially unblocked below, because energy isn't necessarily moving upwards this way. So blockage can happen by degrees. We could have a partial blockage, a blockage in one area due to a misunderstanding or a trauma or some kind of belief that blocks energy in a certain portion of our yellow ray, but energy is still moving through the yellow ray. Or we could have a complete blockage that almost stops the energy. So that, I think, is important to highlight, because a lot of people who are drawn to spiritual seeking want to do the work of these higher chakras. They want to do the path, follow the path of the adept, and unravel the mysteries and see clearly, which are very noble goals. But that energy for that higher work becomes available only insofar as these lower chakras are open and balanced and cleared. So that highlights the necessity of always doing the digging down into the dirt of life and doing the basic work of tending to your body and your relationships and all the fundamentals of life.
Good point.
So is it possible that someone could have open balanced energies, higher energies, but the lower ones are blocked? How do you address that?
I have an example that might help illustrate it, is say that throughout the day, a person is generally a loving person, and they can share their love pretty openly, and that would indicate that they're generally balanced throughout their energy system. But once they get into a certain situation, that situation just gets under their skin, and then that blocks their ability to love. So say they just get so angry when somebody cuts them off in traffic. They can go the entire day and love everybody. Then somebody cuts them off in traffic and they are, cussing and screaming, and they just get really angry at it. I think that is a very, very simplified example of how you could have a blockage in a lower energy center but still have activations and balance in the rest of your system.
That's a great example. But how do you open up those? How do you use the higher energies to open up those lower energy centers?
Well, the balancing technique is probably the best thing that I know of for using that. What you do is, at the end of the day, you in your meditation, you review the day. What happened during the day that knocked you off your center of love, like Osman was saying. And you look at those experiences, and those are the ones that you take into your meditation, and you intensify it, whatever it was. Make it big, make it huge. And then you allow the opposite to come into your experience. You don't try to create it. You allow the opposite of anger to begin to form within your mind, and to get as large as the anger was that you blew up and made it really big. And then you accept yourself for having both of these means for the Creator to know itself, contained within your being. And you love yourself, so that the end result is that love is produced from the catalyst that you experienced during the day that knocked you off your center. So you look at your daily experiences, and they are not by chance. As I said, we program for incarnation what we want to do with our lessons and how we're going to see things that happen to us. That's why 2 or 3 people can be sharing one experience and have 2 or 3 different perceptions of that experience, and totally different, because we have different programming. We are different people. We're all unique, and we learn different things from the same situation that another person may learn something else from. So you look at your daily round of activities, what happens to you, what threw you off, and just keep doing that day after day. That's living the conscious life, very mindful of what's going on, so that you don't take anything for granted, you don't slough it off. You look for the value, you look for the teaching, the kernel of truth that can to help you out.
To be more aware about your actions and feelings.
Right.
And how does Ra explain the idea of soul? What is a soul?
Soul seems to be an individualized portion of the one infinite creator. Has got all of the potential that the creator has to experience and to create its own reality. And it is a mind, a body, and a spirit, and it can move through the entire octave of densities by doing what we've just been talking about, going through the various levels of experience and learning from them what is available. The soul has an infinite amount of time to progress and may do so in an infinite number of ways. We make free will choices to form our lives in a certain way to learn different lessons. There's an infinity of ways in which the soul can express itself and become one with the Creator once again.
Does it have memory of past life?
Oh yeah. And the soul is the repository of all past lives. And that soul, or some people call it the higher self, or the magical personality, or whatever. These are different aspects of our total being that we can use as resources in our progress along the spiritual journey.
And are souls separate from each other? Every person's soul is separate?
In a way. Ultimately, no. Ultimately, we're all one. But the reality itself, the creation, is something that seems to be quite separate, each portion from the other. The galaxies and the stars and the people on the planets and everything in our lives all seems to be quite separate. And that's the way that we begin our perception of this separateness. And as we continue along the spiritual path, we discover there's more and more unity that links us with everyone and everything. But it's a very, very long process. It's something that will take us millions of years to accomplish. So to say right now that everything is one, you think, well, it's absolutely impossible. I'm not the same thing as that door handle over there, or that car going down the street. But eventually we'll discover who we are.
And some people also...
I heard Jim said, I'm not the same thing as that door handle over there, and I was thinking of a new t-shirt that says, "We are door handles." Sorry.
Door handles of the world unite.
Has your group still been channeling Ra?
No, that stopped in 1984 when Don Elkins died. We needed the three of us, Don, Carla, and myself, for that contact to happen. So Carla was very certain about that. People asked her afterward, well, why don't you try to find a third person and replace Don? But she felt that Ra was very clear on making it obvious that we had to have these three people, and that it would be a good idea to try it without Don.
But you're still continuing with channeling?
We do. We channel twice a month, September through May, and we channel an entity, or a principal actually, named Quo, Q''U''O. And this entity came into our experience in 1986, 2 years after Don died. And it turned out that this was a principle concerned or comprised of three different social memory complexes. The original one was Hatan, which began channeling back in 1961, of the fourth density of love. And the second one was Latui, from the fifth density of wisdom, which was the entity we were channeling before the Ra contact started. And then, apparently, Ra, in a kind of a step-down fashion, is the sixth density representative, shall we say, of this triad. So we still have kind of a tangential contact with Ra, but Quo is most usually represented in speech-wise by those of Latui. So we do have channeling continuing, and new channeling class has just been going on now for about 2 years, and done very well. And we look forward to keeping up the traditions of elemental research in this regard.
Have they shared any information about what spirituality means for the beings from that world? Is it different from?
That's also a really big question. I think my take on it would be that these are beings who have made the choice that we are here to make their density of service to others. And so as they progress down the path in the higher densities, that choice intensifies to a very high degree. And so spirituality for them is completely service-oriented. And a big way to do that is serving planets like Earth who are calling for help. And they're probably serving each other in some ways. I think in that environment there's probably a very rich teacher-student relationship between like a fourth density entity and a fifth density entity and things like that. So for part of it at least, it's a very service-based spirituality where it is all about expression of service.
And maybe service in a wider perspective because they are also serving planets. No.
Yeah, we probably can't comprehend the type and scope of service they can provide.
Yeah, Rod describes that reality itself fundamentally changes in the fourth density. They said that in the fourth density, they don't have the veil of what Rod calls a veil of forgetting, separating their conscious from their unconscious mind. So they're not in the thick illusion that we are here. They don't see themselves as being separate from all else. And when the veil falls, one consequence of that is that individual thoughts and feelings and experiences become totally open to everyone else through means of what we would see as telepathy now, but it's the norm in these other higher densities, so that language doesn't have to be used. Like, for instance, you would be able to feel what I'm feeling, I would be able to feel what you're feeling, and then all the individual experiences and the individual memory becomes available to the whole, and thus forms what Ra calls, in very technical terms, a social memory complex. So what that means is that all the beings on a fourth density planet share one mind, and they have access to that one mind, and they can act together as one unified being because of the social memory complex. Whereas here we're fragmented and separated from one another. So when the channeling that Jim was describing that All Research does, we are channeling a social memory complex. If it identifies itself as Hatan, it's consists of presumably millions or so of souls who share this one mind and communicate as one to us. And to wrap this up, regarding the fourth density specifically, Ra says that love is visible. It's tangible almost, and there's no longer a sense of the self being separate from the creator. All is understood as one, but there's still many, many lessons ahead for the fourth density self, and so on.
What about you, Jim? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would have to assume a whole lot, that I can read their minds, but I think they would look at spirituality as being their existence. If there isn't anything, I don't think they would separate the concept of spirituality from the way they live their lives. That would be their spirituality, the way they live their lives. And to be able to be of service to other portions of the Creator, such as we are here, needing the service, they would see that as the thing they most want to do, to give of themselves. They're not separate from us, off meditating and feeling total unity and not worried about anybody else. They are very concerned about the rest of the creation. They want to lend themselves in whatever way they can, because not just because that's the way that they progress, it is, but because that's in their hearts, that's in their soul, that's in their mind, that's in their total being. I mean, that's just like walking and breathing for us. It's natural for them to want to be of service. But I think the thing that they have to be the most careful about, what they told us anyway, is to not be of service in a way that infringes on our free will. They can't learn for us. They can't give us answers. They can give us clues, and they can help us with inspiration and with examples. But they can't say, well, now what you need to do is this, this, and this. because that would take away the strength that comes from learning. You know, our spiritual muscle would be weak if we had people doing that for us. So I think that's their major concern, is they don't infringe on free will.
And it seems like in their dimension, time is not as strict as in this dimension, and you can go back in time and make some changes. Is that correct?
Yeah, the eternal now is a real mind-blowing concept. I haven't got it yet, but they say they live, you know, in the eternal now, and that Ra said that they were not a part of time, so they could be with us at any of our times. Here in third density, we do have a past, a present, and a future, but beyond it, apparently they don't exist. And one of the things that blows my mind is that Ross said that they have had contact with entities from the next octave, and they've had contact with entities from the previous octave. The previous I can understand, you know, that's the past, present, and future stuff. But they've had contact with entities from the future. Those are the light bringers that bring the light and harvest. And that is, I'm afraid I can't, you know, give a lot of light, shall we say, onto the concept of the eternal now, because it still is beyond my comprehension. You guys want to try it?
Likewise, I have a quick thought I could offer, and that's that Ra describes, in the beginning there's only the Creator. There's what they call undifferentiated unity, or intelligent infinity is the term that they use. And the Creator discerns a concept, and that is that it can know itself. So there's some cosmological beginning steps there that I won't go into, but the creation is born, and part of that creation is the illusion of space and time. Space and time are a construct, a sort of environment that is created so that individualized portions of the Creator can move through this field that we call space and time. And to answer your question, I don't know what the experience of time is in higher densities, but according to these reports, it does change. Like the physics of space and time changes, and the entities of higher densities have different relationships with time until when you reach the point of sixth density, according to Ra, you are outside of the stream of time. But you're nevertheless still proceeding in what seems like this sequence of evolution, and how that works, I have no idea.
And sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
And what does it mean if you can go back in time and make changes? What is the purpose of being in a linear progression like we are right now?
I don't know about going back in time and making changes. I think you can go back to previous incarnations and learn something there that you can apply here and make a change here. I don't think you can change something that's occurred. That's already on the record, and you can't erase it. You can learn from it, though.
I was going to say that concept I've heard talked about in a lot of channeled messages, apart from LL Research channeling. Ra never talked about that specific scenario, being able to like go back in time and change the future or the present in that way. But they do talk about time in a way that is much more open, where in their reality there isn't such a stricture on time. So what is possible in that view, who knows? They never really got into it, and it's like Jim and Gary were saying, a little too mind-bending to really consider. But that specific idea was never really discussed in the Law of One.
And it seems like some of the channeling information that comes through different ET beings, and I don't have deep knowledge about it, but it seems like we are not getting new information now. Do you feel the same way? It seems like we are getting the same information about creating reality ourselves, and but we are not getting anything new. Am I wrong?
Well, I am not that familiar with everything that we are getting from other sources, so I can't say that for sure. I think that what we're getting is what we need. Ra has always suggested that as you use the information that is given you, then you make yourself available for more information. That was why they talked to us, because been through the beginning information that came from Hatan and the intermediate that came from Latwii. So they thought that we might be ready for the more advanced or the more intensive, as they said, information. I think there's a certain amount of information basically that is usable here in the third density. What we really need to do is to use what we've got, because we haven't done that yet. Most people aren't aware that they are here to learn spiritually and to grow spiritually. Most people are not conscious seekers of truth. Most people are going through their lives thinking that the reason that they're here is to get a bigger bank account or a healthier family or more friends or more position and status and so forth. You know, those are all means toward an end. Those are not ends, but a lot of people think they are. So I think we need to use the information that we've got. I think we have plenty of information.
And when we are ready for new information, it will come.
Right.
Quickly, Ross says that the material for study is the self. So really, everything we need and everything we're learning is right here in ourselves. And any information that comes to us from outside is just an aid on that path, which Ra describes. Ra says the disciplines of the personality are 1, to know yourself, 2, to accept yourself, 3, to become the creator. And there's a lot that sparkles in channeled information, including some of LL research, but other sources as well, that I think there's a lot of distractions that take the attention away from the path of learning to learning unconditional love for self and all others, learning how to understand who you are, and so forth.
And can you give us some advice on how to use discernment about keeping, because there is so much pseudo knowledge about this subject? How do we use discernment, and how can we gauge real knowledge from pseudo knowledge that's out there?
I think we awaken our discernment just by looking at the material, reading it, thinking about it, and then seeing intuitively just what is the response that comes from our heart. You know, I think that each of us has a way of filtering information that comes to us by that intuitive faculty. We know more than we think we do. There is a greater source of information available to us. Like I said, our higher self is always available when we call upon it. And we have guides to help us out too, and loved ones that have passed on. So if we say, you know, in our meditation, if we say, now, what should I do about this situation? And then meditate on it, you're very likely going to get an answer. Or maybe just contemplate, just think about it. Because we know what we need to do, really. Sometimes we don't think we do. Sometimes we confuse ourselves. But if we just really get down to, well, what does my heart want? What does my heart say? Then go with it. And if you don't, your way is just as good as anybody else's. We're all different. You know, we can use all the tools, or some of the tools, or a few of the tools that are available. There are so many available from good sources. But what you choose is your way, and go with it and do it. It's just as valuable as anyone else's.
What do you think, Gary?
I have something to add, but I've been going after Jim a lot. Austin, do you want to give him space?
Jim's describing this very personal approach to discernment, and I think that's really important, because we could give advice about how we think is the valid way to find quote-unquote valid information, but then we could describe this material that we would find invalid, that somebody who hears us is going to say, but the material that I resonate most with is just like that, and it's been infinitely useful in my own life. So I think that it's important to realize that people have their own journeys, and sometimes there are stages on journeys where information that is appealing to them in a certain way, in a certain light, is useful for a reason. So if it is quote-unquote invalid information or distracting information, they are still interested in it and they resonate with it because it is part of their journey of learning, and they will eventually learn something from their resonance with that information. So we do, I think, have ways and ideas, and Gary might share some, about how to find quality, valid information but it's important not to make that a blanket generalization about everybody's path.
This is why I love, we do a podcast together, and we three respond to a common question, and I always love listening to what they have to say, because no matter how complete or deep I think my own reply might be, I'm always awed that they thought of something that's equal to or better than whatever came to my own mind, and we three synthesize into a more complete answer. But anyway, sorry. Regarding discernment, like Austin said, every path is unique, and Ra says specifically that there are no mistakes. So even if somebody has a low threshold of discernment and is just gullibly soaking up everything and being distracted and not digging into what we would consider the heart of spiritual evolution, that's right for them. And either through folly or resonance, they will eventually learn. But what I wanted to add to Austin's was that upon our own path, I think I can speak for all three of us, but correct me if not, some of the measures that we in general might employ when exercising discernment include the what's the word I'm looking for? The depth of the information. For instance, information can be on the surface level shallow and transitory and distracting. One easy target that comes to mind is conspiracy theory. As fascinating as that can be, it tends, in our opinion, if somebody else is interested in conspiracy theory, more power to them. I'm only reflecting on what works for us and what we consider valuable. Conspiracy theory tends to take the attention away from the work of opening the heart, tends to lead to a disempowered worldview, and because it's this realm of misinformation and disinformation, and you never know what's true, and it's always every day there's a new narrative and a new story, and the whole world then becomes interpreted through this lens of what sinister plan is being hatched. But I'm getting a little off track here. Other shallow sources of information fall under the category that Ra called transient, meaning our path of spiritual evolution is about discovering the eternal self, the infinite self, who and what we really are. And some information is information, say, about the stock market. That's transitory, or transient rather. It's not really going to help, likely, from our perspective, not likely going to help us discover who we are beyond our personality shell, the infinite self within. And another lens of discernment includes positive versus negative. Ra describes a possibility that those who channel, rather, let me say, act like radios. They tune their dial to receive a certain frequency from a discarnate source. And if the tuning is not done properly, for instance, if you open up your radio, there are, in Ra's cosmology, negatively oriented beings. So the channel could receive negatively oriented sources of information and not know it because their tuning isn't as precise as it could be, and they have not challenged the source in the name of that which is closest to their heart. So anyway, a very positively oriented channel could receive negatively oriented information. And in discerning what is positive versus negative, there's no ultimate litmus test, but some of the criteria that we three might employ when making that discernment is negatively oriented information may focus on transient information. It may speak to the necessity of control of self or others. At base, one of its key tactics is to create an environment and mindset of fear and paranoia and worry about the future and the things that you need to do to survive. But at its heart, negatively oriented information will suggest the elite, that something is, they will help to aggrandize the ego of the person or the audience and to suggest that they are better than, or different than, or other than, or so forth, and not focus on the message of unity and love, whereas positively oriented sources will speak with inspiration about the unity of all humble, oriented service of opening the heart and loving all other selves as the self, whatever it is they do, whatever government they belong to, or whatever sinister plot they may be hatching, that love is the center and is the way forward. So that's just like a thumbnail, really rough sketch of how one might apply different lenses of discernment. And those, of course, aren't the only ones. Those are just some really general, vague ideas.
I so agree with those ideas, and I think it's necessary nowadays because we have so much information that's being thrown at us. It's good to have some tips around how to use discernment.
Any viewpoint nowadays can be validated with an internet search. You can find proof or evidence of anything that you believe in with the internet. So it's a very difficult time to find truth. For whatever that means to you, anything can seem true.
So this will be personally useful to me.
And information that is of value to us is stuff that will matter 10,000 years from now. It speaks to spiritual principles that will always be useful on the journey, not just for what's happening in the year 2018, for instance.
My next question was about, and you all would be the best people to answer this question. There seems to be a generalization about how being intuitive and getting into meditation and everything, it seems like it's more like a feminine quality to have, and more, it's usually women who do that. But do you think it's changing and it's becoming more, like even more men are becoming more intuitive and embracing their inner world?
Oh yeah, thank goodness. The male dominance for so long has, led to so many wars on this planet, and I think that the feminine energy is becoming much more pronounced now in everybody, and I think it's noticed probably more in males because it hasn't been there so much before. This isn't a blanket statement, but in general, I think males have been kind of dominating and separating and desiring power and position, and have contributed more to the difficulties of Mother Earth than any other source. And I think now that if the males especially, but everybody, can avail themselves of the feminine energies of acceptance, of cooperation instead of competition, of nurturing, of lending a helping hand when people need it. That's the path to the fourth density. That's why we're here. That's the heart. Yeah. So I'm totally in favor of the move toward the feminine.
How about you, Austin? Do you see these changes happening where men are comfortable being intuitive?
Absolutely. I think for so long we built up social narratives about masculinity and femininity that it's really hard to know if something is really innate to masculinity or femininity, men or women. But it seems apparent, I think, to most people that men have dominated in a certain way for a very long time and have sort of squashed energies that are associated with feminine energy. And there seems to be an awakening to these energies where men are becoming more in tune with those things that have been squashed for so long. And it, I think, is a difficult transition socially. I think one of the polarizing themes in society is the idea of feminism and the concept of patriarchy. But I do believe that there is a spiritual awakening. The awakening to femininity in the social world is an awakening to spirituality in general as well.
Do you want to add to that?
Austin has made a lot of study of this and is really well qualified. I would just add in a much more watered down sense that, relative to the potency of what he could offer, that's that the heart center is, Ra assigns gender qualities to the chakras, right? Like red ray has a more masculine quality, or am I making that up? Orange ray has a feminine quality?
You might be making that up. I don't remember that.
I had that idea in my head.
Go with
so,
it.
audience,
It's your
please.
interpretation.
Serious take.
Associates certain gender qualities with the chakras, feminine, masculine. Yeah, more like receiving and outgoing. And anyway, my understanding is that the heart chakra has a necessarily inherently feminine quality, and that is our movement presently from third to fourth density is moving into the heart. So as Jim especially was describing, so much of our history has been, and this connects to your question about balance too, a massive imbalance in power towards the masculine side of the two principles, even to the point of subjugation and enslavement of females, and the feminine principle within the male self. So yes, I think there is an awakening. And one final quick point on that point, and that's that there is a town in the States called Asheville, North Carolina, and there's a Law of One study group there, and we had the privilege of meeting them there with their study group a year and a half ago. And Asheville is a place where we see that feminine principle that you're describing manifesting in community. And the qualities that become apparent to me in that communal setting are, like Jim and Austin were describing, receptivity and listening and empathy and that sort of kindness and compassion and embrace of others for who they are. And on the negative side of that, there's an absence of desire to dominate, but to cooperate. So, yeah.
These are some really valuable insights. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Okay. I just want to encourage everybody who is seeking spiritually to continue doing what you're doing. Even when it seems like you're not getting anywhere, that is one of the things I think every seeker has an experience of, the feeling that, well, I don't think I'm really getting where I want to get, and I'm getting discouraged. What I think makes the most difference is consistency of your effort, of your determination, that you have faith that what you're doing is valuable, and you have the will to continue doing it until eventually one day you discover you have made progress, and you will continue to make progress to open your heart and share love with everybody around you, because that is what is everyone's potential. And I wish you Godspeed on your journey.
How about you, Gary?
I have a composite of things I could say, if that's okay. I collected some points along this conversation I wanted to add quick thoughts to. One, regarding the 51%, 95%, what's also interesting about those polarities is that it communicates that we have a mix of both within ourselves. We're not just, even if we've successfully made the choice of service to others, we're not only service to others, we also have service to self within us. And the more purely rather, the further we progress along, say, the service to others path, the more we can raise that polarity. So, for instance, I have no idea, I'm only speculating, but like a Jesus figure might have been 80 to 90% service to others, who knows? One. Two, you asked about, is it possible to open these while having blockages down here? And Rod does describe, that's another balance, that it is, you could say, engage in really intensive spiritual discipline and open your third eye. But if your house is not in order in the lower chakras and you have blockages down there, you're setting yourself up for a very severe and maybe even dangerous imbalance by gaining access to information and pulling higher voltage energy into the system. But the blockages will, just like driving at high speeds, if one of your tires is deflated or something, your balance is going to be more and more off until, if you don't correct that imbalance through love and forgiveness, that off you go. And then finally, to answer your, no, not finally yet, one more point before finally, and that's that we didn't offer what is a usual disclaimer about the way LL Research offers its service and offers its information, and we always like to communicate that there is never any sense, we never share this information from the sources that LL Research channels or that we write ourselves. We never suggest that anybody needs it. It's a very dispassionate sort of offering. Our orientation is that if this works for you, great, run with it, and we're here to help and to answer questions. But if you're not resonating with this, then set it aside. Never abandon your skeptical mindset. Always question sources, whether it's us or anybody else. Never accept sources just on the basis of self-proclaimed authority, per se. And this is what I love about the Law of One philosophy, is that Ra talks about the radical authority of the self to chart their own journey. So the seeker is their own authority, and certainly can seek authority from outside, but ultimately only you can know what is true for you. Only you can walk your path. And then finally, I'm sorry, is there anything I'd like to close with? And that's only the exhortation to meditate. It's one of the most consistent themes in the Confederation's philosophy that our research has received, and that's to meditate. And if you can do it daily, do so daily. It is one of the most powerful and potent means that each seeker has within their own hands to affect their own spiritual journey and their own transformation and their own self-knowing and their own self-accepting. So, thank you.
That was a really good conclusion for this video. I think we covered all those points, and you were able to kind of make it concise, which is really valuable. Thank you. Austin?
This, just as a repetition of what Gary was saying, is that we don't want to be authorities when we talk about this thing, these materials. Our greatest desires for seekers who are interested in it to form their own relationship with it. And disagreeing with us is perfectly fine, because we are also students along this path. So we're happy to share opinions and everything like that, but it is our goal and our desire for people to relate to the material on their own terms, and we're happy to help, but not as authorities, I think.
So this information is presented just for people, if they feel resonance to it, they can come and access it. It's not like forced upon them, it's just available.
Right. It's available for free in downloads, PDFs on www.llresearch.org.
And you had another website, Bring Forth?
www.bringforth, that's 4 with a th.org, has various blogs and our online store.
And forums.
And forums.
Community forums, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming here, and I really value all your time. This interview personally gave me a lot of clarity on a lot of information from your books. So I really deeply thank you, all three of you.
Yeah, you rock.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having us and doing what you do.
And I want to thank viewers for watching this video. If you like this video and if you think this information was valuable, please remember to subscribe. Thank you.